The clock struck noon as Amelia Kincaid stood motionless at the altar of Trinity's only church, her white gown gleaming in the May sunshine that streamed through the stained glass windows. The year was 1878, and Trinity, Colorado, was experiencing one of its finest spring days, perfect weather for a wedding that would now never take place. The murmurs grew louder as the assembled townsfolk shifted uncomfortably in their pews, watching as Edward Blackburn, the banker's son and Amelia's fiancé of 8 months, turned to her with cold eyes. "I cannot marry you," he announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not after learning what you truly are." Amelia's heart plummeted to her stomach as Edward reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping. "A thief," he spat, waving the paper. "A common criminal who served time in a women's reformatory in St. Louis. Did you think I would not discover your past? That I would bind myself to damaged goods?" The words sliced through her like a knife. The church, decorated with spring wildflowers and ribbons, suddenly felt suffocating. Edward turned on his heel and strode down the aisle, his parents following with expressions of smug vindication. They had never approved of their son marrying a woman who had arrived in Trinity alone, with no family and only secretive references to her past. Amelia stood frozen, painfully aware of every whisper, every shocked gasp, every pair of eyes burning into her skin. The secret she had carried for 5 years was now exposed in the most humiliating way possible. She had been 16 when hunger drove her to steal food from a merchant's stand in St. Louis. A year in a reformatory had followed, a harsh sentence for a desperate orphaned girl. "Well," said the minister awkwardly, "I believe we should," but Amelia was already moving, gathering her skirts and walking with measured steps down the aisle, her head held high though her vision blurred with tears. She would not run. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Outside the church, the spring air felt crisp against her flushed cheeks. She paused only briefly before beginning the long walk back to her small rented room above the millinery shop where she worked. Behind her, she could hear the church doors opening, people spilling out to continue their gossip in the daylight. "Miss Kincaid." The deep voice came from her left, and Amelia turned to see Jackson Vance leaning against his horse at the hitching post. The rancher's broad shoulders filled out his dark suit, and his hat was tipped back slightly, revealing eyes the color of the summer sky. Unlike the other townsfolk, his expression held no judgment, only quiet concern. "Mr. Vance," she acknowledged, her voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances. "I imagine you heard." "I did," he replied simply. He had been standing at the back of the church, having arrived late after dealing with a sick mare at his ranch outside of town. "Would you allow me to escort you home?" Amelia hesitated. Jackson Vance owned the largest cattle ranch in the county and was known as a fair employer and a skilled horseman. They had exchanged pleasantries on the occasions he'd come into town for supplies, but they were hardly more than acquaintances. "That's kind, but unnecessary," she replied, acutely aware of her tear-stained cheeks and the wedding dress that now seemed to mock her. "I can manage." Jackson's eyes moved past her to where a group of women were gathered, their whispers barely concealed behind gloved hands. "I insist," he said, his tone gentle but firm as he untied his horse. "No one should walk alone after such a day." Too exhausted to argue, Amelia nodded. Jackson mounted his stallion with the easy grace of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, then extended his hand to help her up behind him. She gathered her voluminous skirts as best she could and allowed him to pull her onto the horse. "Hold tight," he instructed, and Amelia hesitantly placed her hands on his waist as he guided the horse away from the church. They rode in silence through Trinity's main street. Amelia could feel the curious stares of townsfolk who had not attended the wedding, but who would soon learn of the scandal. Trinity was small enough that news, especially scandalous news, traveled faster than a prairie fire. "I suppose the entire town will know by sundown," she said quietly. Likely before, Jackson agreed, his honesty refreshing amid a day of pretense. Small towns feed on such things. And what do you think, Mr. Vance? Amelia found herself asking, surprised by her own boldness. Now that you know I'm a criminal. Jackson guided his horse around a mud puddle before answering. I think Edward Blackburn is a fool, he said finally, and I think your past is your own business. They reached the millinery shop, and Jackson dismounted before helping her down. Her wedding dress caught on the stirrup, and he carefully freed the delicate fabric without comment. Thank you for the escort, Amelia said, already dreading entering the shop where Mrs. Wilson, the owner, would surely have questions. Jackson nodded, then surprised her by saying, Miss Kincaid, I believe your past makes you stronger, not weaker. Remember that when the gossip starts. With that simple statement, he tipped his hat, remounted his horse, and rode away, leaving Amelia standing on the boardwalk with her ruined wedding dress and his unexpected words of comfort. The days that followed were exactly as difficult as Amelia had anticipated. Mrs. Wilson, influenced by the prevailing sentiment in town, reluctantly informed Amelia that her services would no longer be required at the millinery shop. The ladies of Trinity, she explained with pursed lips, might not feel comfortable purchasing hats from someone with your history. Amelia had nodded, unsurprised but devastated nonetheless. Her meager savings would not last long, and opportunities for a woman alone in the West were limited, even more so for one with a tarnished reputation. She had already been turned away from the general store when she inquired about work, and the schoolteacher position she had once dreamed of pursuing was now unthinkable. A week after the disastrous non-wedding, Amelia sat in her small room, carefully counting her coins and contemplating moving on to another town. Perhaps Denver, where anonymity might be easier to find. She was interrupted by a knock at her door. When she opened it, she was surprised to find Mary Donovan, the widow who ran the local boarding house, standing there with a determined expression. Miss Kincaid, she began without preamble, I understand you're in need of employment. Amelia blinked in surprise. Yes, but I need help running the boarding house, Mary continued. My arthritis makes the stairs difficult, and the cooking for 12 boarders is becoming too much. It's not glamorous work, but it includes room and board plus a small wage. Suspicious of this unexpected offer, Amelia asked, Why would you hire me when everyone else in town is shunning me? Mary's weathered face softened slightly. Because 20 years ago, I arrived in a different town with my own secrets and no one to help me. And because Jackson Vance suggested I might find a capable assistant in you. Jackson Vance, Amelia repeated, stunned. He spoke to you about me, he did, said you had grit, and that's what matters out here. Mary straightened her apron. So, are you interested or not? I need someone starting tomorrow. The work at the boarding house was indeed far from glamorous. Amelia rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, mostly single men who worked at the sawmill or the railroad. She changed linens, swept floors, and assisted with the endless cooking and cleaning that kept the establishment running. The days were long and physically demanding, but Mary proved to be a fair employer and eventually a friend. The town's gossip about Amelia gradually subsided as newer scandals took precedence, though she still received cool looks from certain residents, particularly Edward Blackburn's mother, who made a point of crossing the street whenever Amelia appeared. For 2 months, Amelia saw little of Jackson Vance. She heard he was busy with his ranch, preparing for cattle sales and dealing with the summer responsibilities that kept ranchers tied to their land. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of him riding through town, but their paths did not cross directly, until one sweltering July afternoon when Amelia was returning from the general store with supplies for the boarding house. The street was unusually busy due to a cattle buyer visiting from Denver, and she didn't notice the group of drunken cowboys until she was nearly upon them. Well, if it ain't the jailbird bride, one slurred, stepping into her path. Heard you were damaged goods, that true sweetheart. Amelia tightened her grip on her packages and attempted to walk around him, but another man blocked her way. Don't be unfriendly now, we're just making conversation. Please move aside, Amelia said firmly, refusing to show fear though her heart was pounding. Or what? You'll steal from us. The first man laughed, reaching to touch her face. Before his fingers could make contact, a strong hand gripped his wrist. Jackson Vance had appeared seemingly from nowhere, his expression dangerously calm as he twisted the cowboy's arm away from Amelia. Apologize to the lady, he said quietly. Vance, the man acknowledged with a nervous laugh. No harm meant, just having some fun. Apologize, Jackson repeated, applying slightly more pressure to the man's wrist. Sorry, miss, the cowboy mumbled, looking far less confident than moments before. Jackson released him and turned to his companions. I suggest you boys find your entertainment elsewhere. Something in his tone, or perhaps his reputation, convinced the men to move along, muttering under their breath, but offering no further resistance. Are you all right? Jackson asked Amelia once they were gone. Yes, she replied, adjusting her packages. Thank you, though I could have handled it. A slight smile touched Jackson's lips. I don't doubt that, but I was raised not to stand by while a lady is harassed. He glanced at her parcels. May I help you carry those to the boarding house? As they walked together, Amelia found herself curious about the man who had now twice come to her aid. Mrs. Donovan mentioned that you recommended me for the position at the boarding house. Jackson nodded. Mary's a good woman who needs help, and you needed work. It seemed a simple solution. But why involve yourself at all? Amelia pressed. You hardly know me. They had reached the boarding house, and Jackson set her packages on the porch. He considered her question carefully before answering. When I was 19, I made a mistake that could have landed me in prison, he said finally. Instead, someone gave me a second chance. I've tried to live by that example. Amelia was stunned by his candor. What was your mistake, if you don't mind my asking? Another time, perhaps, he said with a slight smile. But I meant what I said at the church. Your past has shaped you, but it doesn't define your worth. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Kincaid. As summer progressed, Amelia found herself watching for Jackson when he came to town. Their conversations, though brief, became something she looked forward to. He never pressed her for details about her past, never made her feel judged for the mistakes that had led her to the reformatory. In early August, Mary Donovan surprised Amelia by asking her to deliver a basket of baked goods to the Vance ranch. Jackson's been good to this town, Mary explained, and he's hosting the cattle buyer from Denver. Thought he might appreciate some fresh bread and pies for his guests. The real reason behind Mary's request became obvious when she insisted Amelia take the afternoon off to make the delivery personally, rather than sending it with the regular supply wagon. The fresh air will do you good, Mary insisted with a poorly disguised smile. The Vance Ranch lay 5 miles outside of Trinity, a sprawling property that included lush pastureland and access to creek water, even in the driest summers. Amelia had borrowed Mary's gentle mare for the journey, and as she approached the main house, she was impressed by its solid construction and well-maintained appearance. Unlike the ostentatious homes of town elites like the Blackburns, the Vance Ranch house was built for practicality and durability, with wide porches and sturdy walls designed to withstand Colorado winters. Several horses were hitched outside, indicating Jackson had company. Amelia hesitated, suddenly feeling self-conscious about interrupting a business meeting. Before she could decide whether to leave the basket and depart, the front door opened, and Jackson emerged with 3 well-dressed men who were clearly the cattle buyers from Denver. His face registered surprise at seeing her, quickly followed by what appeared to be pleasure. Miss Kincaid, he called, excusing himself from his guests and walking to meet her. This is an unexpected visit. Amelia held up the basket. Mrs. Donovan sent these for you and your guests. Fresh bread and apple pies. That was thoughtful of her, Jackson said, taking the basket. Then, to Amelia's surprise, he turned and introduced her to the businessmen. "Gentlemen, this is Miss Amelia Kincaid, one of Trinity's most capable residents." The men tipped their hats politely, showing none of the judgment she had come to expect from strangers. One of them, an older gentleman with silver at his temples, smiled warmly. "Any friend of Jackson's is welcome. Will you join us for coffee before you return to town? We've just concluded our business." Amelia glanced at Jackson, who nodded encouragingly. "I would be honored," she replied, allowing him to help her dismount. Inside, the ranch house was comfortably furnished with solid wooden furniture and practical fixtures. A housekeeper, an older Mexican woman named Alina, who had apparently worked for the Vance family for years, served coffee while the men discussed cattle prices and railroad schedules. Amelia sat quietly, observing Jackson in his element. Here, among his peers and on his own property, he exhibited a quiet confidence that was compelling. The cattle buyers clearly respected him, and she gathered from their conversation that he was known for fair dealings and quality stock. After the buyers departed, promising to return in 2 weeks to finalize the purchase of 300 head of cattle, Jackson offered to show Amelia the ranch before she returned to town. "It's not often I get visitors who aren't here on business," he explained as they walked toward the stables. "Especially not visitors who might appreciate the view from the North Ridge." The stables were immaculate, housing over a dozen horses, including several magnificent breeding stallions. Jackson introduced her to each horse by name, his affection for the animals evident in the way he spoke to them and in their responsive nickering. "Would you like to ride out to the ridge?" he asked. "It's the prettiest spot on the property, especially this time of day." Amelia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I would like that." Jackson saddled 2 horses with practiced efficiency, choosing a gentle mare named Daisy for Amelia. They rode at a comfortable pace through verdant pastures where fat cattle grazed, and Jackson pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the ranch's history. "My father purchased this land in 1850, he explained. "Started with 50 acres and 20 head of cattle. By the time he died 10 years ago, he'd built it to what you see today, 2,000 acres and one of the most respected herds in Colorado." "You've maintained it well," Amelia observed. "It's beautiful land. It can be harsh too," Jackson said, gesturing toward the mountains in the distance. "Winters are brutal, and drought can destroy everything you've worked for, but there's something about this life that gets into your blood." They reached the ridge he had mentioned, and Amelia gasped at the view. From this vantage point, they could see for miles the rolling ranch lands, the distant mountains, and the tiny speck that was Trinity. "It's magnificent," she breathed, understanding why he had wanted to share it. They dismounted, and Jackson spread a blanket on the ground so they could sit comfortably. For a long moment, they simply enjoyed the view in companionable silence. "May I ask you something personal?" Jackson finally said, turning to face her. Amelia tensed slightly but nodded. "After your kindness, I can hardly refuse. What really happened in St. Louis?" The directness of his question startled her, but she found herself wanting to tell him the truth. "I was orphaned at 15 when influenza took both my parents within a week of each other," she began. "With no family to take me in, I tried to support myself as a seamstress, but work was scarce and I was young and inexperienced." She took a deep breath. "One winter, when I hadn't eaten in nearly 3 days, I stole bread and apples from a merchant's stand. I was caught immediately. The merchant was influential, and the judge made an example of me 1 year in a women's reformatory." Jackson listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "When I was released, I knew I needed to start somewhere fresh. I worked my way west, taking whatever honest jobs I could find. In Trinity, I thought I'd finally outrun my past." She laughed bitterly. "I was wrong." "How did Edward discover your history?" Jackson asked. "I'm not certain," Amelia admitted. "Perhaps he had me investigated before the wedding. Or maybe someone recognized me from St. Louis." And you never told him? Amelia shook her head. I was afraid. Edward often spoke about propriety and reputation. I convinced myself that my past was irrelevant to our future together. She sighed. Another mistake in a long series of them. I disagree, Jackson said quietly. Your only mistake was believing Edward Blackburn deserved you. The conviction in his voice made her look at him sharply. His blue eyes held her steadily, without artifice or pretense. Now it's my turn to ask something personal, Amelia said. You mentioned a mistake when you were 19. What happened? Jackson smiled ruefully. I got involved with rustlers. Not intentionally. At first I thought they were legitimate cattle buyers offering my father a good deal. By the time I realized what was happening, I was implicated. The sheriff was ready to arrest me when a neighboring rancher stepped forward with evidence that I had been deceived. That must have been frightening, Amelia said. It was, but it taught me to judge people by their actions, not by single mistakes or rumors. He looked toward the setting sun. We should head back. It will be dark soon. As they rode back to the ranch house, Amelia found herself viewing Jackson Vance in a new light. His easy acceptance of her past wasn't mere politeness, it was born of his own experience with judgment and redemption. At the ranch house, Jackson helped her mount Mary's mare for the journey back to Trinity. Allow me to escort you, he offered. It's getting late. They rode side by side as the summer evening cooled around them. When they reached the boarding house, Jackson dismounted to help her down, his hands strong and sure at her waist. Thank you for today, Amelia said. For the tour and for listening. It was my pleasure, he replied, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary. Perhaps you might visit again, Sunday if you're free. Elena makes an exceptional Sunday dinner. Amelia felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in months, hope perhaps, or simple happiness. I would like that very much. Over the following weeks, Amelia's visits to the Vance ranch became regular occurrences. Mary Donovan, clearly playing matchmaker, was all too happy to give Amelia time off for these excursions. Sometimes Jackson would show her different parts of his property, teaching her about cattle raising and horse breeding. Other times, they would simply sit on the wide porch of his home, talking about books they had read or sharing stories from their pasts. In Trinity, people began to notice. The whispers changed from scandalous recounting of Amelia's criminal history to speculation about her relationship with the county's most eligible bachelor. Some, like Edward Blackburn and his family, viewed the development with obvious disapproval. Others, particularly those who had always found the Blackburns too pretentious, seemed quietly pleased by this turn of events. For Amelia, the days took on a new brightness. She still worked hard at the boarding house, still endured occasional cold shoulders from certain townsfolk, but Jackson's friendship provided a counterbalance to these difficulties. And gradually, she admitted to herself that her feelings had grown beyond friendship. One crisp September afternoon, Jackson invited her to join him for a special occasion, the breaking of a new stallion he had recently acquired. He's spirited but intelligent, Jackson explained as they approached the corral where several ranch hands had gathered. The kind of horse that will make an excellent sire if he can be properly trained. Amelia watched in fascination as Jackson entered the corral with the magnificent black stallion. The horse snorted and pranced nervously, eyeing Jackson with suspicion. With quiet words and careful movements, Jackson began the process of earning the animal's trust. It was beautiful to watch the communication between man and beast, the gradual building of mutual respect. When Jackson finally mounted the stallion for the first time, Amelia held her breath as the horse bucked and circled. But Jackson stayed seated, his body moving in rhythm with the horse's attempts to dislodge him, never fighting against the animal but working with its movements. Eventually, the stallion calmed, accepting Jackson's guidance. The ranch hands cheered as horse and rider completed a circuit of the corral at a controlled trot. When Jackson dismounted, his face was flushed with exertion and triumph. He handed the reins to his foreman and joined Amelia at the fence. "That was remarkable," she said admiringly. "I've never seen anything like it." Jackson smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's about patience and respect. All living creatures want the same things: to be treated with dignity and to feel secure." Something in his expression made Amelia's heart beat faster. They had been circling each other much like Jackson and the stallion, building trust gradually, neither rushing the process. "Walk with me," he asked, offering his arm. They strolled toward a small creek that ran through the property, the afternoon sun dappling through the cottonwood trees. When they reached a secluded bend in the creek, Jackson stopped and turned to face her. "Amelia," he began, using her first name as he had started doing in recent weeks, "I've grown very fond of you." She felt a blush warm her cheeks. "And I of you, Jackson. I find myself thinking of you constantly," he continued, taking her hands in his. "Your strength, your kindness, the way you faced adversity with such grace." Amelia's heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "Jackson, let me finish," he said gently. "I know it hasn't been long since your experience with Edward, and I understand if you need more time, but I want you to know my intentions. I care for you deeply, and if you'll allow it, I would like to court you properly." Joy bloomed within her chest, but caution tempered it. "Are you certain?" "The town still talks about my past. Associating with me openly could affect your standing with certain people." Jackson's expression grew serious. "Amelia, the opinions of certain people mean nothing to me compared to what I feel for you. Your past makes you who you are: someone who understands struggle and perseverance, someone with compassion born of experience." He stepped closer. "It makes you stronger, not weaker, and I admire that strength more than I can express." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes at his words. For so long she had viewed her past as a shameful burden, something to hide and overcome. Jackson saw it differently, as an essential part of her character, valuable rather than detrimental. "Then yes," she whispered, "I would be honored by your courtship." Jackson's smile was radiant as he raised her hands to his lips, placing a gentle kiss on her knuckles. "You've made me very happy, Amelia Kincaid." The coming weeks brought a new routine to Amelia's life. Jackson would call at the boarding house several evenings a week, sometimes taking her for drives in his buggy, other times simply sitting with her on the front porch swing. On Sundays after church, they would ride to the ranch for dinner with Alina, who had taken an immediate liking to Amelia. Trinity society had mixed reactions to their courtship. Some, like Mary Donovan and the local doctor, were openly supportive. Others maintained a polite neutrality. The Blackburns and their social circle were pointedly cold, going so far as to exit establishments when Amelia and Jackson entered. "It doesn't bother you?" Amelia asked one evening as they walked past the town's restaurant, where Edward and his parents had promptly requested their check upon seeing the couple. "Their rudeness, no," Jackson replied calmly. "Though I admit, I find it amusing that they believe their disapproval should matter to us." "Edward seems particularly upset," Amelia observed. Her former fiancé had taken to glaring at them whenever their paths crossed, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "Edward is realizing he made a foolish decision based on pride and the opinions of others," Jackson said. "Watching you happy with someone else only reinforces that reality." The truth of Jackson's assessment became clear the following week when Edward confronted Amelia outside the general store. She had been selecting apples when she felt someone standing too close behind her. "You didn't waste any time finding a replacement, did you?" Edward's voice was low and bitter. Amelia turned slowly, determined not to show any reaction. "Good afternoon, Edward." "I see what you're doing," he continued. "Securing yourself a wealthy husband, very clever for a former thief." The insult stung, but Amelia kept her composure. "I believe our relationship ended at your decision, Edward. What I do now is no longer your concern." Edward's face flushed with anger. "Does Vance know everything about you? Every sordid detail?" "Yes," Amelia replied simply. Jackson knows all of me, past and present. This straightforward answer seemed to deflate Edward somewhat. He had clearly expected her to be hiding her history from Jackson as she had from him. "He'll tire of you," Edward said finally, his tone more petulant than threatening. "Once the novelty wears off." "Perhaps," Amelia conceded, surprising him, "but that's for us to discover, not you." She paid for her apples and left Edward standing in the store, staring after her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher: regret, perhaps, or simple confusion at her refusal to engage in hostility. She didn't mention the encounter to Jackson, seeing no reason to create friction. But word reached him anyway through Trinity's efficient gossip network, and he addressed it that evening as they sat by the fire in the boarding house parlor. "I heard about Edward's behavior today," he said, his tone controlled but with an undercurrent of anger. "Are you all right?" Amelia nodded. "It was unpleasant but not unexpected. Edward's pride was wounded when you began courting me. He views it as a personal slight rather than as a matter of the heart." Jackson studied her with admiration. "You continue to amaze me with your understanding, even of those who have hurt you." She smiled softly. "Understanding doesn't equal forgiveness. I haven't forgotten how he humiliated me at the altar, but dwelling on bitterness serves no purpose." "Wise as well as beautiful," Jackson murmured, taking her hand. "Amelia, I had planned to wait until Christmas, but after today's events I find myself unwilling to delay." Her breath caught as he slipped from his chair to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "I love you," he said simply. "Your strength, your kindness, your resilience. I love the way you faced adversity without becoming hardened by it. I love your gentle hands and your fierce heart." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a ring, a simple but elegant gold band set with a single diamond. "Amelia Kincaid, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Time seemed to stop as Amelia looked into his earnest blue eyes. This moment was so different from Edward's proposal, which had been delivered at a public dinner with an air of conferring a great favor upon her. Jackson knelt before her as an equal, offering his heart with humility and genuine love. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. "Yes, Jackson, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the passion they had both kept carefully restrained during their courtship. When they finally separated, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "We'll marry whenever you wish," he said. "Tomorrow or next year, whatever makes you comfortable." Amelia thought about his offer. After her experience with Edward, a long engagement held little appeal. Before winter, she decided. "I don't want to wait through the snow to begin our life together." Jackson smiled broadly. "November then, that gives us 6 weeks to prepare." November would be perfect. News of their engagement spread quickly through Trinity. Mary Donovan was ecstatic, immediately offering to help with wedding preparations. Elena, when told, embraced Amelia with tears in her eyes, calling her Hija and promising to teach her all of Jackson's favorite meals. Not everyone was as supportive. When Amelia entered the general store to purchase fabric for her wedding dress, Mrs. Blackburn was there with several of her social circle. The women fell silent at Amelia's appearance, then Mrs. Blackburn deliberately turned her back. "I believe I've changed my mind about shopping today, ladies," she announced loudly. "The atmosphere has become rather common." The women followed Mrs. Blackburn out of the store, casting disapproving glances at Amelia as they passed. The storekeeper, Mr. Peterson, looked uncomfortable but not unsympathetic. "Don't mind them, Miss Kincaid," he said when they were gone. "Some folks can't stand to see others happy. Now, what can I help you with today?" Despite such incidents, the weeks leading up to the wedding were among the happiest of Amelia's life. She and Jackson spent every available moment together, planning their future, discussing improvements to the ranch house where they would live, and simply enjoying each other's company. As the wedding day approached, Amelia experienced occasional moments of anxiety, remembering all too clearly her previous experience at the altar. Jackson sensed her unease and suggested an alternative to a church ceremony. "We could marry at the ranch," he proposed one evening as they walked along Trinity's main street. "A simple ceremony with just our closest friends. Alina could prepare a feast, and we wouldn't have to worry about unwelcome observers." The suggestion brought immediate relief. "That sounds perfect," Amelia agreed, "though I don't want you to think I'm ashamed or hiding." Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I know you're not hiding, Amelia. But our wedding should be a joyful day, not an opportunity for the Blackburns and their ilk to create discomfort." And so it was decided. On a crisp November afternoon, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Colorado sky, Amelia Kincaid and Jackson Vance were married on the north ridge of the Vance ranch, the spot where he had first shared his feelings for her. Judge Thompson from the neighboring town officiated, and the only guests were Mary Donovan, Alina and her husband, and a few of Jackson's closest ranch hands. Amelia wore a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk, with her hair adorned with late blooming wildflowers that Alina had collected that morning. Jackson looked handsome in a new black suit, his eyes never leaving Amelia's face as they spoke their vows. "I promise to cherish you all the days of my life," Jackson said, his voice clear and strong. "To stand beside you in joy and sorrow, to honor your past and build our future together." "I promise to love you faithfully and completely," Amelia responded, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain her emotions. "To face life's challenges with you, to create a home filled with understanding and respect." When Judge Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Jackson gathered Amelia into his arms for a kiss that sealed their union, witnessed by the mountains and sky and the small circle of people who truly cared for them. The celebration that followed was intimate and joyful. Alina had outdone herself preparing a feast of Jackson's favorite dishes, plus specialties from her native Mexico. They dined at the long oak table in the ranch house, sharing stories and laughter, toasting the newly wedded couple with fine brandy that Jackson had been saving for a special occasion. As twilight fell, the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in what was now their home. Jackson built a fire in the bedroom fireplace while Amelia changed from her wedding dress into a nightgown of fine cotton trimmed with lace, a gift from Mary. When Jackson returned to find her standing by the window, her silhouette illuminated by moonlight, he paused in the doorway, overcome by the realization that this extraordinary woman was now his wife. "Are you happy, Mrs. Vance?" he asked softly. Amelia turned, her face radiant with joy. "Happier than I ever believed possible," she answered truthfully. Jackson crossed the room and took her in his arms, his touch gentle but filled with longing. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I will spend my life making sure you never regret choosing me." Their first night as husband and wife was tender and passionate, a perfect beginning to the life they would build together. Amelia, who had feared that her past would forever prevent her from experiencing true love and acceptance, found in Jackson's arms a belonging she had never known. As winter settled over the Colorado highlands, Amelia adjusted to life as a rancher's wife. There was much to learn managing the large household, keeping accounts for the ranch operations, and learning the rhythms of rural life. Alina proved an invaluable teacher, patiently showing Amelia the systems she had developed over years of service to the Vance family. "You have good hands," Alina approved as she watched Amelia knead bread dough, "and a quick mind. Senor Jackson chose well." The ranch hands, initially cautious around their boss's new wife, soon warmed to Amelia's genuine interest in their work and her willingness to learn about every aspect of ranch operations. By Christmas, she knew each man by name and something of his background, creating a sense of family among the workers that improved morale during the harsh winter months. Jackson watched his wife's integration into ranch life with pride and deepening love. "You were born for this," he told her one evening as they sat before the fire after a long day. "I've never seen the ranch running more smoothly." Amelia smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "I love it here. The work is hard but satisfying in a way I never experienced in town." "Speaking of town," Jackson said, reaching for a letter on the side table, "Judge Thompson sent word that the cattle buyers from Denver will be arriving next week. We'll need to go into Trinity to meet them at the hotel." It would be Amelia's first return to town since their wedding nearly 2 months earlier. She felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of facing Trinity society as Mrs. Vance, but quickly mastered it. She was no longer the vulnerable woman who had been humiliated at the altar. She was now the wife of one of the region's most respected ranchers, secure in her husband's love and her own worth. The journey into Trinity was made easier by a brief thaw that had cleared the roads of snow. Jackson drove their sleigh with Amelia beside him wrapped in furs against the January chill. As they approached the town, he squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Ready," Amelia nodded. "I'm not afraid anymore, Jackson. Whatever reception we receive, we face it together." Their first stop was the bank, where Jackson needed to arrange financial matters related to the upcoming cattle sale. As they entered, conversation briefly halted, then resumed at a lower volume. The bank manager, who had always been cordial to Jackson, greeted them with professional politeness if not warmth. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance," he acknowledged. "How may we assist you today?" While Jackson conducted his business, Amelia was acutely aware of being observed by the other bank patrons. Some nodded politely, others pretended not to notice her. She held her head high, reminding herself of Jackson's words, "Your past makes you stronger." As they left the bank, they encountered Edward Blackburn on the boardwalk. He had lost weight since summer, and his complexion had a sallow cast that suggested he wasn't taking proper care of himself. He started to pass without acknowledgement, then stopped abruptly. "Mrs. Vance," he said stiffly. "Mr. Vance, congratulations on your marriage." The forced politeness seemed to cost him considerable effort. Jackson nodded coolly in response. "Thank you, Blackburn." An awkward silence followed before Edward cleared his throat. "I'm relocating to Denver next month. Father has arranged a position for me at the First National Bank there." "I wish you well," Amelia said sincerely. Edward's eyes flickered with something regret, perhaps, or simple recognition of what he had discarded. "Thank you. I hope you both find happiness." With a nod, he continued down the boardwalk. "That was unexpected," Jackson commented as they continued toward the hotel. "He's running away," Amelia observed, "just as I considered doing after the wedding disaster." "The difference being that you would have been running from unfair judgment," Jackson pointed out. "He's running from the consequences of his own actions." At the hotel, they met with the cattle buyers over lunch. These men had known Jackson for years and treated Amelia with genuine respect, clearly viewing her as an asset to Jackson's business. Their conversations ranged from cattle prices to railroad expansion to the growing demand for beef in eastern cities. "Denver is booming," one buyer told them. "New people arriving daily. If you ever consider expanding your operations, Vance, now would be the time." Jackson glanced at Amelia. "We're discussing possibilities, perhaps breeding more horses alongside the cattle business." Amelia felt a warm glow at his use of "we." Jackson had indeed made her a full partner in all aspects of their life together, consulting her on business decisions and valuing her perspective. After concluding their business, Jackson suggested they visit Mary Donovan before returning to the ranch. The older woman was delighted to see them, insisting they stay for tea and peppering Amelia with questions about ranch life. "You're looking well," Mary observed approvingly. "Marriage agrees with you." "It does," Amelia confirmed, exchanging a loving glance with Jackson, "though I miss our conversations sometimes." "Then you must visit more often," Mary declared. "Winter won't last forever and spring roads are more manageable." As they prepared to leave, Mary pulled Amelia aside. I wanted you to know the town's attitude is shifting. Not everyone, of course. The Blackburns and their circle will likely never change, but others have been impressed by how you've handled yourself through everything. It matters less to me now, Amelia admitted. I've found where I belong. The winter months passed in a rhythm of work and intimate evenings by the fire. Jackson and Amelia grew closer with each passing day, discovering new facets of each other's characters and deepening their bond through shared responsibilities and challenges. In late February, as the first hints of spring began to appear in longer days and occasional thaws, Amelia made a discovery that brought both joy and trepidation. After consulting with Alina, whose knowledge of such matters was extensive, Amelia confirmed her suspicion. She was with child. She waited until evening, when she and Jackson were alone in their bedroom, to share the news. He had just stoked the fire and was removing his boots when she spoke. "Jackson, I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made him look up sharply. "Is everything all right?" Amelia nodded, suddenly feeling shy despite their intimacy. "Everything is perfect, actually. I'm going to have a baby, our baby." In late summer, Alina thinks. For a moment, Jackson simply stared at her, his expression one of stunned disbelief. Then, with a whoop of joy that likely startled the entire household, he crossed the room in 2 strides and swept her into his arms. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Amelia, you magnificent woman, a child of our own." His unbridled happiness dispelled any anxiety Amelia had felt about his reaction. "You're pleased, then?" "Pleased. I'm ecstatic." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen. "Our son or daughter is growing inside you. It's a miracle." That night, as they lay together in the darkness, Jackson confessed a long-held dream. "I always wanted a large family," he said quietly. "My parents had only me, and after they died, the ranch sometimes felt too empty despite Alina and the hands. I longed for children to fill these rooms with laughter." Amelia placed her hand over his where it rested protectively on her stomach. "Then we shall have to work on filling every room," she teased gently. The spring and early summer were busy with preparations, both for the coming child and for the ranch's seasonal activities. Jackson insisted on hiring additional help so Amelia wouldn't overexert herself, though she remained active in managing the household and keeping the ranch's accounts. In May, they traveled to Denver to purchase items for the nursery and specialized medical supplies that Dr. Williams had recommended. The city was indeed booming, as the cattle buyers had described, with new construction visible in every direction. While shopping in an elegant department store, Amelia unexpectedly encountered Edward's mother, Mrs. Blackburn. The older woman was examining gloves when she looked up and saw Amelia, her eyes widening at the sight of Amelia's now visible pregnancy. For a moment, it seemed Mrs. Blackburn might simply turn away as she had done in Trinity. Instead, after a visible internal struggle, she inclined her head slightly. "Mrs. Vance," she acknowledged. "I trust you are well." "Very well, thank you," Amelia replied, surprised by this civility. "And yourself, managing, Mrs. Blackburn said with a sigh. Denver is quite different from Trinity, more diverse in its social structure. Amelia understood the subtext. The Blackburns had discovered that their Trinity status meant little in the larger society of Denver. "Edward has written to you, I believe, Mrs. Blackburn continued. "Yes, a brief note congratulating us on our expected child." The letter had been stiffly formal but not unkind, a small olive branch that Amelia had appreciated. Mrs. Blackburn nodded. "He is adjusting to city life. His position at the bank keeps him busy." She hesitated, then added with obvious effort, "I wish you a safe delivery, Mrs. Vance." With that limited but significant gesture of goodwill, she moved toward the counter to complete her purchase. "What was that about?" Jackson asked when Amelia rejoined him. "I believe it was as close to an apology as Mrs. Blackburn is capable of offering," Amelia replied thoughtfully. By July, Amelia's pregnancy was advanced enough that travel became uncomfortable, and she remained at the ranch while Jackson made necessary trips to town. Elena hovered protectively, preparing special teas and foods believed to strengthen mother and child, and sharing wisdom from her own experiences as a mother and midwife. "The baby is strong," Elena declared after placing her hands on Amelia's rounded abdomen. "Active like the father." Indeed, the child seemed to be constantly moving, particularly at night when Amelia was trying to sleep. Jackson would often place his hand on her stomach, marveling at the kicks and rolls of their unborn child. "Do you have a preference?" Amelia asked him one evening as they sat on the porch watching a summer thunderstorm approach from the mountains. "Boy or girl?" Jackson considered the question seriously. "I want only a healthy child and a safe delivery for you," he said finally. "But if pressed, I might admit to hoping for a daughter with her mother's courage and beauty." Amelia smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "And I find myself hoping for a son with his father's integrity and gentle strength." "Either way," Jackson said, kissing the top of her head, "this child will be loved more fiercely than any child has ever been loved before." On a sweltering August evening, after a day of unusually intense activity at the ranch, Amelia felt the first pains begin. She was in the kitchen with Elena, reviewing plans for preserving the garden's summer bounty, when a sharp cramp caused her to grip the edge of the table. Elena's experienced eyes immediately recognized what was happening. "The baby comes," she said calmly. "I will send Miguel for Dr. Williams and tell the patron." The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain and effort for Amelia. Dr. Williams arrived quickly from Trinity, having been on alert for this summons. Jackson refused to leave Amelia's side despite the doctor's and Elena's suggestions that the birthing room was no place for a husband. "My place is with my wife," he said firmly, holding Amelia's hand as another contraction racked her body. Throughout the long night, as Amelia labored to bring their child into the world, Jackson provided steady support, wiping her brow, offering water, and murmuring words of encouragement and love. His presence gave her strength when her own began to flag in the pre-dawn hours. "You can do this, my love," he assured her as Dr. Williams announced it was time to push. "You're the strongest person I've ever known." With a final, tremendous effort, Amelia delivered their child into the world just as the first rays of sunrise spilled through the bedroom window. The baby's lusty cry filled the room, and Dr. Williams smiled broadly. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Vance, you have a son." Elena efficiently cleaned and swaddled the infant before placing him in Amelia's arms. Exhausted but radiant with joy, Amelia gazed down at their son's tiny, perfect face. He had a dusting of dark hair like his father's, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they appeared to be the same deep blue. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered, using the name they had chosen if the baby was a boy, after Jackson's father. Jackson sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his arm around Amelia's shoulders as he reached to touch his son's cheek with a gentle finger. "He's magnificent," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Just like his mother." In that moment, cradling her son with her husband beside her, Amelia felt a sense of completion that transcended all the pain and struggle of her past. This was where she belonged, not just at the ranch or in Trinity, but in this family they had created together. The weeks following Thomas's birth were a blur of adjusting to the demands of a newborn while maintaining the ranch's operations. Jackson proved to be an attentive and involved father, often carrying Thomas in a sling across his chest as he worked around the ranch house or reviewed accounts in his study. When Thomas was 6 weeks old, they made the journey into Trinity to have him properly christened at the church. It was a small service, attended by Mary Donovan, Elena and her family, and several of the ranch hands. To Amelia's surprise, a few of Trinity's residents who had previously been cool toward her also attended, including Mr. Peterson from the general store and the school teacher, Miss Hamilton. "People change," Mary observed as they gathered outside the church after the ceremony, especially when they see genuine happiness and decency. The following spring brought new developments to the Vance Ranch. Using profits from the previous year's cattle sales, Jackson began expanding their horse breeding program, focusing on producing quality mounts for both ranching work and the growing demand from military buyers. Amelia, having recovered fully from childbirth and adapted to motherhood, took particular interest in this aspect of the ranch operations. She had developed a good eye for horseflesh and often participated in training the gentler mares. "You have a natural way with the horses," Jackson observed one afternoon as Amelia successfully coaxed a nervous young mare into accepting a saddle for the first time. "They trust you instinctively." "Perhaps because I understand what it's like to need patience and a gentle hand," she replied, stroking the mare's neck soothingly. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Vance household expanded again. In the winter of 1881, Amelia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth Mary, after Amelia's mother and their dear friend, Mary Donovan. Where Thomas was active and adventurous like his father, Elizabeth proved to be thoughtful and observant, watching the world with serious eyes that gradually changed from newborn blue to a warm brown like Amelia's. Life settled into a pattern of seasonal work, child rearing, and community involvement. The Vance's reputation in Trinity and surrounding communities grew, not just as successful ranchers, but as fair employers and generous neighbors. When drought struck in 1882, Jackson opened his water sources to smaller ranchers whose creek access had dried up. When influenza swept through Trinity that same winter, Amelia organized a rotation of women to care for the sick, regardless of social standing. Over time, even the lingering stigma of Amelia's past faded. Occasionally, when new people moved to the area, whispers of her history would circulate briefly, but they found little purchase in a community that had come to respect the Vances for their current actions rather than past mistakes. In the summer of 1883, 5 years after their wedding, Jackson and Amelia received an unexpected letter from Denver. It was from Edward Blackburn, informing them of his forthcoming marriage to the daughter of a Denver merchant and extending an invitation to the wedding. "Will you attend?" Jackson asked as they discussed the letter over evening coffee on the porch, their children already asleep inside. Amelia considered the question carefully. "I think we should," she said finally, not for Edward's sake, but as a way of truly closing that chapter. "We've moved beyond it in our hearts, but perhaps this is a way to acknowledge that formally." The Denver wedding was an elaborate affair, reflecting the Blackburns' desire to establish themselves in city society. Edward greeted Jackson and Amelia with genuine warmth that surprised them both. "I'm glad you came," he told Amelia during a quiet moment at the reception. "I wanted to tell you properly that I behaved abominably 5 years ago. My actions were driven by pride and the fear of what others would think, rather than by any true understanding of character." "That's behind us now," Amelia assured him. "We've all found our proper paths." Edward nodded, glancing across the room to where his new bride, a cheerful young woman named Clara, was chatting with guests. "Yes, though I sometimes wonder if I would have learned certain necessary lessons without the humbling experience of losing you." Later, as they traveled back to the ranch, Jackson asked Amelia how she felt about the encounter. "At peace," she replied after reflection. "There was a time when I thought Edward's rejection would define my life, that I would always be the woman left at the altar when her secret was revealed. Now I understand it was just one event in a much larger story." Jackson took her hand, raising it to his lips. "A story that continues to unfold in ways I never dared to dream." By the time Thomas was 7 and Elizabeth 5, the Vance Ranch had nearly doubled in size and prosperity. Their horse breeding program had gained national recognition, and their cattle operation remained one of the most successful in Colorado. They had added a third child to their family, another son, named William, who combined his brother's energy with his sister's thoughtfulness. The ranch house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family and increasing business responsibilities. Amelia had overseen the construction of a dedicated schoolroom, where the Vance children and the children of ranch employees received their early education from a tutor hired from Denver. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Amelia with a trip to San Francisco, their first extended journey away from the ranch and children. Elena, now assisted by her daughter Rosa, assured them that the household would run smoothly in their absence. "You have earned this time together," Elena insisted, practically shooing them toward the waiting carriage that would take them to the train station. The 2 weeks they spent exploring the vibrant coastal city were a reminder of the deep connection they shared beyond their roles as parents and ranchers. Away from daily responsibilities, they rediscovered the simple joy of each other's uninterrupted company, walking along the waterfront, attending the theater, and spending long mornings in bed at their hotel. On their final evening in San Francisco, they dined at an elegant restaurant overlooking the bay. As they lingered over dessert, Jackson raised his glass in a toast. "To my extraordinary wife," he said, his blue eyes full of love. 10 years ago, you took a chance on a rancher who saw in you what others were too blind to recognize. Every day since has been a gift beyond measure." Amelia clinked her glass against his. "To my steadfast husband, who taught me that the past need not determine the future. You gave me more than a home and family, you gave me the courage to believe in myself again." Later, as they stood on their hotel balcony watching the lights of ships in the harbor, Jackson wrapped his arms around Amelia from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "About the path your life has taken." Amelia turned in his embrace to face him. At 33, she was more beautiful than ever, with the confidence of a woman who had found her place in the world and a few strands of silver beginning to appear in her dark hair. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Every step, even the painful ones, led me to you and the life we've built together. How could I regret that?" The years continued to flow, bringing changes both expected and surprising. Trinity grew from a small town into a bustling community as the railroad expanded and new industries developed. The Vance children grew too Thomas, showing an aptitude for ranch management that pleased his father. Elizabeth developing a passion for medicine that would eventually lead her to medical school in Boston. And William revealing a talent for engineering that would help modernize the ranch operations. Through it all, the foundation of the Vance family remained the partnership between Jackson and Amelia, a love born from mutual respect, and the shared belief that the past creates strength rather than weakness. In 1898, 20 years after their wedding, they hosted a celebration at the ranch that brought together family, friends, and employees to commemorate not just their anniversary, but the growth of the Vance legacy. The North Ridge, where they had exchanged their vows, was now the site of a beautiful gazebo, constructed as Jackson's anniversary gift to Amelia, providing a place for quiet reflection with a view of the land they both cherished. As twilight fell on the celebration, Jackson found Amelia standing alone in the gazebo, looking out over their property. He joined her, taking her hand in his as they had done countless times over the years. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he had posed on their wedding night. Amelia's answer was the same as it had been then, but enriched by the decades of life they had shared. "Happier than I ever believed possible," she said, leaning against the steady strength of his shoulder. "And grateful every day for a cowboy who saw beyond my secrets to the woman I could become." Jackson kissed her temple gently. "I saw only who you already were," he corrected. "A woman whose past had made her stronger than she knew." Together, they watched the sun set over the land that had witnessed their love story, a story that had begun with rejection and humiliation, but had transformed into one of redemption, growth and enduring happiness. A story that proved, beyond any doubt, that the most beautiful beginnings sometimes arise from what appears to be an ending.